find the sum by hand. Then use a calculator to check your work. Now here we have some more problems doing addition with signed numbers, but notice now our numbers have decimals. And the directions don't tell us to just use our calculator to find the sum. We want to find the sum first by hand. So we'll have to remember some things about adding and subtracting decimal numbers. Down here at the bottom, I've just put a little note to remind us of these rules for signed numbers, that if the signs are the same, we know that we want to take the sum of the absolute values and keep the sign. And if the signs are different, we're going to take the difference of the absolute values and use the sign of the larger absolute value for our final answer. In our first example, negative 13 and 2/10 plus 4 and 67 hundredths. Now that's the fancy way of saying these numbers, but negative 13.2 plus 4.67. Here we have two numbers that have different signs that we're going to be adding. And so since the signs are different, as we remember down here, if the signs are different, we're going to take their difference. We're going to subtract. So we're going to subtract the absolute values. We're going to put the larger absolute value on top when we set up our subtraction problem. So since negative 13.2 has a larger absolute value than 4.67, we're going to put the 13.2 on top. And from that, we're going to subtract the absolute value of 4.67. Now remember, when we add or subtract decimal numbers by hand, we need to line the decimal points up. So I'm going to do this, and writing these problems neatly is going to be really important so we have everything lined up as it should be. Now when we start to do our subtraction, we've got a little bit of a problem here that there's nothing to subtract this 7 from. And so if you remember, when we're working with subtraction with decimal numbers, if my decimals don't come out evenly, putting in zeros to make them come out even is really helpful. Now we can go ahead and do our subtraction. We've got some borrowing that we're going to need to do here. So the 2 is going to become a 1, and I'm going to add the 1 there to make that 10. 10 minus 7 is 3. Now over here I'm supposed to do 1 minus 6. Well, I can't do that. And so I'm going to borrow another one over. There's 12. And now what was a 1 is going to become an 11. 11 minus 6 is 5. And remember, here we've got our decimal point. So the decimal point is going to come straight down. And finally, I have 12 minus 4, which gives me 8. As we know, we need to not just come up with the number, we have to check our sign. In this particular problem, we said 13.2 had the larger absolute value, and its sign is negative. And so I need to be sure that my final answer is negative 8.53, or negative 8 and 53 hundredths. In our second example in part B, we have an addition of two negative numbers. Notice that both of these guys are negative. There's a negative and there's a negative. And so we know that if the signs are the same, which they are in this case, we're going to take the sum and then we're going to keep the sign. So we know that our final answer is going to be negative. We know whenever we add two negatives, I'm going to end up with a negative number. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So we're going to go ahead and do our addition. We're going to line these up because we're going to be adding. The order doesn't matter. There's 7.1. And to that, we're going to be adding 8.52. Again, be sure that you line these up so that all the decimal points line up evenly with each other. Again, I'm missing a spot here. Not as big of a deal when I'm when I'm doing addition as when I'm doing subtraction, but it's still not a bad idea to go ahead and let's just put in our zeros so all the numbers go out to the same number of places. And now we can just add down. 0 and 2 is 2. 1 and 5 is 6. Bring down that decimal point. 7 and 8 is 15. And now remember, we had negatives that we were adding together, and so we have to be sure that we say that our final answer is negative 15.62, or negative 15 and 62 hundredths.